spent last weekend with a whole group of people who are passionate about seeing the world reached. It's a challenging thing to think about and something that feels honestly well beyond me. And yet, sitting there thinking about what that would look like brings me to Ephesians 2. I was talking with another friend this past week just about Judas and Peter and thinking through the difference between those two. Judas is somebody who walked with Jesus for years, was in charge of the money, and gets a bit of a bad rap in the Gospels in hindsight. And yet, at the Last Supper, he's sitting beside Jesus, and Jesus declares that this is the one who's going to betray him. Off Judas goes. Peter, on the other hand, zealous throughout his entire life. He has some incredible moments, mountaintop experiences declaring that Jesus is the Messiah, and yet Jesus reminds him that he's also going to deny him 3 times. Peter's not going to stay beside Jesus right when he needs him. And yet their outcomes are so different. Judas hangs himself. His shame gets to him. He can't control what's going on, and he recognizes that he's done something awful. Peter has done something equally as awful, and yet he sticks around. He waits upon Jesus and is restored through a pretty painful process. 3 times Jesus asked him, "Do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And we know from Acts that Peter is not done yet. He continues to screw things up. He continues to be fascinated with the people around him rather than the God who loves him. Ephesians 2, Paul is writing to a church. It's a hot mess. We've talked about it before with Timothy. And yet here Paul is saying, look, we're saved by grace. Nobody gets to boast about it. We do our works because of the obedience of what God has done. People often have a really hard look at the church today, and rightfully so. Some people will look at history and say, there's been some awful things done in Jesus' name. Yes, that is true. Some people will look at their past and say, some awful people have done awful things to me in Jesus' name. Yes, that's unfortunately true. None of those things speak to a God who loves us. Whether it's your parent or a mentor or a community, that Jesus is the better. Judas chose to betray Jesus for some silver. He thought money would be the thing that would get him farther in life, and yet his shame overcame him. Peter was afraid of what other people would think about him, and so that led him to denying himself. Now we know Peter eventually got to a place later in his life where he was obedient to Jesus, even in death. History tells us that he was crucified upside down. He wouldn't be crucified like Jesus was, and he did not deny Jesus. For us, in our life, in our pain, in the way that we move forward, the way forward for a Western church is in radical obedience and radical humility. I can't change you, but I can point you to the one who knows you and loves you and can be a better story for you. We live in a fallen, broken world, and yet it's been paid for. It's been cared for. There is a better story in our lives. It's something worth reflecting on. The difference between Judas and Peter. The way that changes everything in the way that we look at ourselves and the world around us. May the Lord bless you.